So the question is parallel compression on your drum bus just overrated? And is it even necessary in the first place? And also, how should you be deciding between using parallel compression on your drums versus just regular compression strapped across your drum bus? Let's discuss. So before we dive into today's tutorial, I just want to let you know the truth. You do not need fancy gear or plugins to achieve pro level mixes in your home studio. And this is why I've put together my 5-step guide to better heavy mixes. I want you to achieve better results with the gear you already have, and this 5-step guide will point you in the right direction by showcasing the things that matter most when it comes to dialing in a pro level mix, regardless of the gear or tools that you are using. There's a link below in this video's description. You can download it for absolutely free. So just recently, a member within my membership asked an excellent question. He wanted to know, what's the point of using parallel compression on drums when the results are so subtle? And I've had other people ask me when you should be using parallel compression, or when you should be using just regular compression across your drum bus, or when you should not be using compression on your drum bus at all and just focusing on the individual drum tracks. Let me just say this. I absolutely love parallel compression, and this is nothing that's unique to me. Most heavy music mixers utilize parallel compression across a group of drums or on their drum bus, or maybe all of their drums in total. But I also will sometimes skip parallel compression and just use a regular compressor across the drum bus without using parallel compression. And sometimes I won't use any compression on my drum bus at all, and I'll just have all of my drums pretty much going directly to the master fader. And in this video, I'll describe all three techniques and when and why I pull from each of these three. So right here, I have an audio sample by my good friends in a band called Me With Creeps. Let's take a listen to it, and then I'll dive in and explain my processing on my drums and what process I'm using, which one of these three. And then I will demonstrate what each of these three different techniques sound like, so you can have an idea of what you should be using or what you might want to use when mixing your own drum tracks. Let's take a listen. Okay, I'm extremely happy with this drum mix. It sounds super punchy, super powerful, but it doesn't sound overly compressed. And spoiler alert, the reason why is because I'm using parallel compression. Now, what parallel compression is, it's very simple. It's when you run two different processes in parallel or side by side. So there's a version of my drum mix that's uncompressed, and then there's a version of my drum mix that is compressed, and I'm blending the two. And that is what parallel compression is. So let me just briefly explain to you my chain here. The way I'm utilizing parallel compression in this mix, I'm just sending all of my shells of the drums. So from my kick all the way up through to the toms, I'm skipping out on the cymbals. The cymbals are not being compressed in the drum mix at all. They're not being sent to my drum bus. They're being sent directly to the master fader. But all of my shells, kick, snare, and toms are being sent to my drum submix, and also a copy of the drum submix called Drums Para. The two of these are combined and being sent to my drum master submix. Now, this is not the only way to do this. You could also utilize sends and choose just how much of each individual drum tracks you want going to your parallel chain. I like to keep things simple, and in this mix, it's just a duplicate of my main drum submix copied over, and there's a compressor slapped across the copy of my main drum submix. And let's hear these drums in solo. As you can hear, the drums sound very powerful, but in my opinion, they don't sound squashed. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna play the drums in solo once more, and I'm gonna bypass my drums parallel track or my compression track so you can hear just how much weaker the drums sound without the drums parallel compression. Let's check it out. As you can hear, that track adds a ton of smack, and it's compressing my drums between 4 and 8 dB. So you have the compressed version of the drums being combined with the uncompressed version. Now, just to let you know and be super clear, obviously it's gonna sound even more powerful because the apparent volume is louder because there's a copy of the track tucked underneath it. But even with that being said, you could hear that extra smack on the kick and the snare. It just makes the drum sound way more aggressive and way more in your face. So now the question is, when would I decide to use just regular compression slapped across the drum submix and do not use parallel compression? And here's my approach and my philosophy and how I decide to choose between the two. If I want just a general glue to my drum sound, but I don't want it to sound overly hyped or overly punchy, then I will use a regular compressor just strapped across my main drum's submix, and I won't use parallel compression at all. So let's take a listen to the difference between the two. Right now, you just heard parallel compression. I'm gonna play for you a version of the exact same drum tracks with a regular compressor just strapped across my drum's master submix. So it's my drums without the parallel compression, but with a little bit of compression, subtle compression, across the drums as a whole. Let's take a listen. Now, as you can tell, the differences are extremely subtle, and this is why this can be really confusing to a beginner. We're talking only the last 10 to 15, maybe 20% of the total drum sound is affected by these compressors when used in the way that I'm using them. So again, if I'm gonna use a compressor across my drum submix and I'm not utilizing parallel compression, I'm gonna go for way less gain reduction because I don't want to hear the drums pump, especially in metal music where the kicks are going crazy. Maybe if I'm doing something that's a little simpler, like straightforward pop rock or something, I might be a little more aggressive. But that's my philosophy. Again, if I don't want the drums to sound overly hyped and overly powerful, and I just want a little bit of glue, then I'll use just a regular compressor, like you just heard, across the drum submix as a whole. And this leads us to option number 3, not using any compression across the drum submix at all. When would you use that? Okay, well for me, when I want my mix to sound very, very open, and I don't want the mix to sound overly powerful and overly modern, and maybe I'm going for a more older school kind of metal sound, then sometimes I'll just skip compression across my drum submix as a whole. And that's because I want the mix to breathe, almost as if the band is playing right in front of me, and I don't want the drums to sound overly aggressive and overly powerful. Now the sound of this production and this mix really calls for parallel compression, I'm gonna be honest with you, but let's try just completely removing all the compression. We're gonna wipe out the parallel compression, it's muted right here, and let's hear how these drums are sounding in solo and then how they sound in context of the rest of the mix. As you can hear, the differences are still pretty subtle, but I would say this is the most different sounding out of all 3. And it's simple, it's because the drums are all breathing independent of one another. Obviously they're compressed and EQ'd individually, but there's no group compression amongst all of the individual elements. Again, in my mind as a mixer, if I want the mix to sound very open and almost like the band is physically in front of me, and I want the drums to sound extremely natural, then I'll go with this route. Now with this specific production, I really feel that parallel compression adds a whole lot, makes the drum sound super duper powerful and works well. And that's when I opt for parallel compression. And that right there is how I decide between these 3 different techniques. And even though parallel compression might not be that obvious, especially if you're a beginner mixer, it can really add a ton of punch and power and just help your drums cut through and punch through the wall of guitars, vocals, and everything else. So before we go, let's hear this mix one more time with the parallel compression, and let's see what we got. I feel this really works well, mainly because the drums don't have to necessarily be that loud to still sound powerful. And that's the beautiful thing about parallel compression. You're pretty much getting the best of both worlds. The unprocessed drum sound with the squashed, more aggressive drum sound that's being exaggerated by the compressor. So please let me know, are you a fan of parallel compression? Or have you tried using it and to you it actually hurt your drum sound? Let me know your experience, let me know your approach to this, and leave a comment in the comment section below, and I can't wait to hear your opinion. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and a ton of other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. And again, I want you to achieve better results with the gear you already have. Download my 5-step guide to better heavy mixes. There's a link below in this video's description. Until next time, happy mixing.